out loud attendance?
You'll call the roll.
Okay. All right. I want to welcome everyone to the January 12th Planning Commission meeting. I will call the meeting to order. Sam, can you take attendance?
I'm glad to.
Out loud attendance?
I'll start with Ms. Rosenberg.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Dana.
Here.
Mr. Keebler.
Here.
Ms. Blackmore.
Here.
Mr. Snavely.
I'm here.
Mr. Bracken. Here. And Mr. Watt.
Here. Thank you, Sam. Next item, approval of the agenda. Do we have any additions, changes, or corrections to the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As staff, I would like to recommend that we flip the two cases and put the 2020-04 first as old business. We think it's a simpler case. And then we would also we have a new topic we'd like to add. We don't know if time will allow, called alley lot setbacks, and that would be after both cases.
All right.
I move approval of the agenda with the corrections as identified by Sam.
I second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second with Snavely and Dana. This is a voice vote. So all those in favor of well, actually, yes, please raise your hand if you are in favor of approving. All right. Raise your hand if you are in favor, and we're good. All right. So the approval of the agenda is fine. If everyone's had the chance to read the minutes from December 8th, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I so approve.
I second.
All right. I'll take Snavely for the motion and Rosenberg for the second. All those in favor, raise your hand, please. And just for the audio, all members have raised their hands, so there's no need for nays. And at this point, we'll take public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Sam, do we have anyone?
Mr. Chair, we do have a hand raised. I believe it's actually for a case item, but I can go ahead and unmute Mike Shea just in case it's not.
All right.
Mr. Shea, you're unmuted.
It was a mistake. I'm still learning how to be in a Zoom meeting. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. Your item's up in just a minute.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Seeing no comments from the public, we will move on to reports from.
Wait.
Oh, Bill.
Jessica would like to speak.
She's speaking as a member of the public.
Staff, but not on an issue. So just a general public comment.
All right, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Green, and I'm here tonight to introduce you to Seth Kropenbaker. Seth is the assistant to the city manager and will be taking on some economic development duties for the city of Oxford. And so from time to time, he may be attending some meetings. So Seth, would you like to briefly introduce yourself? Still muted, Seth.
Seth.
Still muted.
There you go.
There you go.
I gave my best in those for opening 3 seconds. That was all I had. I just want to again say thank you. Very excited since I joined the city. I spent 18 years at the university working in recreation. I started for the city at the end of July. I've really loved the opportunity and excited to continue to learn and nice to meet all these folks. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Jessica. All right. Now we'll move on to reports from commissions, boards, committee, and staff. We'll start with Mr. Dana. Anything from CIC?
Yes, in fact, there is. And what I can report is that there was a robust discussion about shovel-ready projects. And Jessica had helped the members of the CIC draw up their proposals in various charts, which made it easy for us to see what those shovel-ready projects might be. And I will just tell you what I introduced was a shovel-ready project regarding the start of a commercial kitchen. And this would be an extension of what TOPS does. And that is to say, it really expands the work of TOPS way beyond simply handing out food, but rather helping clients prepare food and meeting the needs of people who have the skills to do that. And it's a job creator. And the reason it's a job creator is that there are people who want actually to start baking or whatever businesses right there on the site. If we have a building, if we can find money for a building and then incorporate a commercial kitchen, I think we'll have some success in our community that goes beyond what we've been entertained so far. That's my report.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dana. I will go on to Mr. Bracken from Environmental.
Yeah, we have a bunch of things we've been discussing lately. Our greenhouse gas inventory that works with PSP at Miami continues going on. Solarized Oxford, which both we're talking about things the city can do, but also cooperative purchasing. So if there are any people out there in Oxford that would like to potentially get cheaper purchase on the possibility of putting solar on the roofs, you should definitely reach out to me or Chantel or anyone on the Environmental Commission. We're also talking more about potential Bee City certification and also potentially doing a food farm at Mary Day Park. And I think we'll be hearing more about that coming up soon, hopefully.
Perfect. Thank you. Ms. Rosenberg, HAC.
Sure. I'm just going to really briefly say, though, I was at the December 17th CIC meeting, and I just thought it was super cool to learn about the new tech hub and innovation center that will be at the Elm Street building. Just wanted to kind of put forward that the plans are in motion. There's going to be one great tenant that will bring job opportunity to Oxford at, Jessica Green was talking about it being like a $15 an hour kind of job for a company that will do like 3D manufacturing. So, and kind of teaching other companies how to manufacture stuff. So I just wanted to mention that because a lot of us were at the design charrette for the Elm Street property. So that's really cool that that's in motion. But then as far as HAC, we actually had a really short meeting last month. But one thing that I did want to mention was Sam and I in 2021. So it's 2021, Sam, how you doing? We're going to talk about incentives to developers that will not be mandatory, but will either give them the option to have maybe increased density or increased parking, or, we're kind of at the idea stage, but we want to actually get that into motion to either have developers provide affordable housing or money for the housing trust fund in order to get incentives. And that's my report.
Perfect. Thank you. I will do the historic architecture report. We meet tomorrow, and an old business item is the Truth and Reconciliation Project, which we had a presentation on. I believe it was the last meeting, and that's an initiative to identify some of the historic. I've told you in the past that the HAPC is far beyond buildings of brick and mortar, and it's really about the story of Oxford, especially as it pertains to our history. And in particular, the topic that we discussed last meeting was the unfortunate lynchings that happened in Oxford. And so we're very interested in that and have been working with Dr. James and a number of others on that. So we'll hear a little bit more about that, I would assume, tomorrow. And then the new business item, formal presentation of 12 Beach Street, the former Chinese restaurant between the church and UDF. We had a preliminary presentation last time, and this time it's the formal presentation. So nothing to report other than what's coming. And then Ms. Blackmar, do you have anything to report? I know you are with transportation.
That's right. I'm on the Parking and Transportation Advisory Board. And we've started out the year reviewing some of our parking prices and policies, and trying to get a sense of what technology offers as we look to shift to smarter, more adjustable meters going forward, and trying to understand that and how we can provide good recommendations to council for future parking policy related to meters and pricing uptown.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Snavely and Keebler, anything that you would like to report from commission or other areas? Council, I should have said we're the commission. All right, Mr. Perry and Mr. Moore, I will let you have the floor.
Thank you, everyone. Also, I wanted to mention that there was an OKI monthly meeting today with the Intermodal Coordinating Committee. Not a lot of new business, but I did want to share that there's a draft, the first ever Ohio Department of Transportation Bike and Pedestrian statewide plan. It's called Walk Bike Ohio. A really well done plan. Actually has some good ideas on how we do our comp plan update this year too. But there's some really good takeaways in there that I think are really representing a shift in goals for ODOT. Ohio does not rank well for bike and ped safety, access to those kind of facilities, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So I think it will eventually make its way to affecting us, whether it's funding or otherwise. Comments are being taken until February 26th for that plan. So if you just Google Walk Bike Ohio, you can find it, and be great to have any input on there. I will say it's very well done, but there's certainly always opportunity for tweaks to it before it's finalized. And that's all. Thanks.
Nothing for me, Mr. Chair.
All right, I believe it is time to move on to our old business item. So I believe we will go to Zach. Mr. Moore, are you? All right, you have the floor.
I'll present on the item. Yep.
Move that we adjourn to public hearing for PC 2020-04.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. For the record, all hands are raised, so we will move to Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So our first item for tonight is fairly minor in nature. This pertains to case PC-2020-04. There are no slides on this one, so if you want to refer to it in your packet, it's on page 33. Basically, all that we're asking for tonight is a vote on revising condition number 16. This went with the final plan development approval for the South Farm development, what is officially titled South Farm Section 4, but will really be the second phase of the South Farm residential community off of Kerr Road. This is one that we saw last year. Council approved it on May 5th, 2020, and this was for a total of 25 single-family dwelling units. There is a copy of that approved plan on page 35, in case you're interested. So the application had been approved subject to 16 conditions that were recommended by this commission, and that was essentially following staff's recommendation, which was agreeable to the applicant at the time. And condition number 16 specified that the final plan approval would be valid for 5 years with an opportunity for a 1-year extension. Then it further said that all public infrastructure, including streets, trails, utilities, and sidewalks, except those that are falling on lots yet to be built with a dwelling, would have to be in place within 1 year of the final plat approval. So what that essentially mandated was that all of the public infrastructure had to be in place no later than May 5th of this year, 2021. Due to unforeseen circumstances, which the applicant is more than welcome to address related to COVID and so forth per their letter, they are asking for an extension of that deadline. They asked for a 1-year extension, so I believe they're asking for it to be extended to, would be 1 year from today, so January 12th of 2022. And they are planning to get started on that infrastructure this spring. So since City Council had originally accepted the recommendation of the Planning Commission in its original approval, we as staff believe that the commission basically has the ability to approve this minor tweak to that prior condition. And certainly due to the circumstances having to do with COVID-19, we want to allow the developer to get started on this very exciting project. So with that, staff would recommend approval of this extension to January 12th, 2022. And we're asking for a vote to that effect, and happy to take any questions from the board.
All right, at this time, if there's any questions from the board about what Mr. Moore has covered, I'll entertain those now. If not, I'm happy to move on to Mr.
Okay.
Shea. All right, I don't see anything from the board. Mr. Shea, if you would like to speak, you are welcome to contribute anything that you would like us to entertain before we adjourn and have a discussion.
Mr. Shea is muted.
Sam, do I have the ability to unmute him?
He's actually a panelist, so he should, we don't have.
There we go.
There we
Mr.
go.
Shea,
Are we good?
you have the floor.
Oh, I just wanted to let, it's been a tough year for all of us, as we all know. We actually have a developer, somebody to help us finance it. We've been through 5 or 6 banks and a lot of them said they just weren't dealing with anything like that this year. So we found someone that has the money, has the capability and a lot more knowledge, to be quite honest with you, on going through with this development. And we've got most of the groundwork laid. We just need to sign all the papers with him, which should be done within the next 60 days. And then we were hoping to break ground in the spring.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shea.
No other questions?
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Shea? I do not see any. So thank you, Mr. Shea. At this time, I will accept a motion to close the public set or
First, see if there's any public who want to comment on it.
thank you. I thought I had to close that first, but gotcha. Mr. Perry, is there anybody in the public raising their hand?
There are not, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Snavely, for saving me.
I move to adjourn from public hearing back to our regular session.
I second.
All right. Mr. Snavely motion, Mr. Dana second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. For the record, all of our hands are raised and we are out of public session. Now it is discussion for the board. And I will say as a footnote, it is far easier to pay attention than to do this. All right. So are there any questions or comments or concerns that the members of the board have? Mr. Keebler.
I think you actually need a motion to approve before you can discuss.
Very good.
I'll make second the motion to approve this.
All right, Mr. Keebler made the motion and Mr. Snavely seconded. All those in favor, I'm sorry, I was of discussion is what I was meaning to say.
There you go.
All right, so now we'll go to discussion.
So
Go ahead,
I
Mr.
think this
Snavely.
is a very reasonable request, and I recommend that my colleagues approve it.
I second.
All right. For the record, I believe I was one of the proponents of this and I have no problem. See, I'm trying to be neutral as the chair. All right. Is there any further discussion? All right. Seeing none. See, this is when we actually should make the motion to approve because that's what got me. So there's a motion on the floor, no further discussion. I believe this will be a roll call. Mr. Perry?
I'll call it. I'll start with Mr. Keebler this time.
Yes.
Ms. Blackmar,
Yes.
Mr. Dana,
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
and Mr. Watt.
Yes. All right, the motion passes. So now we will move on to our new business item. And if I am remembering this correctly and jotted my notes down, I will accept a motion to move into public phase, public comment. Mr. Snavely is raising his hand.
I move to adjourn to public hearing for PC 2020-16 preliminary plan development.
All right, Mr. Dana seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All the hands are raised, so we will move into public session. Mr. Moore, I believe, Mr. Snavely.
Mr. Chair, on advice of council, I will recuse myself from this item, so I will not be participating.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Moore, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Went ahead and pulled up my presentation. Hopefully everybody can see it. If you can't, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll begin here. So for the staff's presentation, this is a preliminary plan development, and this is titled Lake Forest Phase 1. This is intended as a condominium style development. And the quick details, the applicant is Scott Webb Architect. The property owner is Four Leaf Development LLC. The engineer on the project is Bayer Becker, represented by Etta Reed, PE. And the site area is a little under 12 acres. And most of the 12 acres is zoned R2A, single and two family residential. There's a little sliver at the very top that's actually technically R4 zoning. But the vast majority of it and the area that's being developed is zoned R2A. And the proposal is for 36 single-family detached condominium units. So there's a lot to this one. So I'll try and go as slowly as I can and give you all the details as thoroughly as I can. So first, I'm going to take you back to 2004. This is the PUD site, the original PUD, which encompassed a much larger area than the subject site tonight. This was about 174 acres in total. This was when it was previously under the county's jurisdiction. So the county commissioners actually approved this plan, this preliminary PUD plan in December of 2004. It included a variety of uses. There was a business component that was supposed to be here in the center of the site. Hopefully everybody can see my little hand cursor there. That ultimately never came to pass. That ended up turning into the annex development. There's also what was originally known as the College Suites Apartments that is now level 27. That's there to the north. It also identified additional residential off here to the northeast with a density cap of 12 dwelling units per acre. And then it also identified residential to the south, which is part of the area that we're considering tonight, and that was specified at a density of 2 to 4 dwelling units per acre. So moving forward in time, so this is an aerial image from 2007, so you can see the College Suites development came first, and then that coincided with the construction of South Point Parkway. And then moving even more forward in time, fairly recent aerial imagery from 2018. So now you can see the annex has popped into the picture. And looking at the location, so you can see that identified here in this black line. So it's a rather unusually shaped site. I would liken it to a horn shape. And this is very much influenced by the routing of Lake Forest Drive, which was a recently constructed street. Hopefully all of you have gotten a chance to see it. And that, of course, the alignment of that street followed the original PUD plan that originates from that 2004 timeframe, back when it was under the county jurisdiction. So, and just to quickly note, so you can see the little fine point that's up here, that rests against the right-of-way that was recently dedicated. It's a 60-foot wide right-of-way for that new street, Lake Forest Drive. So that's what's leading to that very fine point up there. But that basically leads up to, I believe it's Magnolia Drive is right here, and Sassafras Drive is here, and then South Point Parkway is where Lake Forest Drive connects to here. And that basically turned what was previously a cul-de-sac, it turned it into a T intersection at that location. So here's a look at the same map, but just showing the zoning classifications. So what had happened once the properties were annexed into the city, there was actually a development agreement that went with that. And what that development agreement specified was that this previous preliminary PUD that had been adopted by the county, that zoning classification needed to be converted into city zoning classification. So there was a separate action that was approved in August of 2007 that sort of laid out the zoning classifications for the site, trying to find the best fits per the densities that had been approved. So the highest densities, that 12 units per acre, it was found at that time that the best equivalent zone under the Oxford zoning code was R4 up in the northeastern location. But then the sites that we're dealing with, the more immediate area we're dealing with tonight, that was a lesser density of 2 to 4 dwelling units per acre. So the best fit zoning classification that was chosen at that time was the R2A zone. So the way we see it presently, the way staff sees it is this is essentially a straight zone site. It's R2A. The record wasn't complete enough, at least from our perspective, to indicate that the PUD overlay had been retained. So we believe it is not there and is just a straight zone R2A. And what the applicant is asking for is to have a planned development be approved over top of that existing R2A zoning classification. Here's a look at the comprehensive plan. And I didn't actually draw the actual shape of the site on top of this map. So I just noted the general location here with the black dash circle. So this is identifying the site for traditional neighborhood development. And the way that the plan sort of describes what that means, they say that this will be an area that grows in a traditional neighborhood pattern in areas that are appropriate for a variety of residential development types because of their proximity to planned or existing roadways and utilities. They say that new development should be walkable with a distinct center and edge with open space and well-designed streets and public spaces and multiple housing options. So that's how they describe that classification. And just to note here, so you'll see this kind of purple color here to the north. That is actually noting a mixed-use center. So what I believe that's intending to convey is the desire for small-scale commercial, almost like a gateway area into the city. And I think that the gas station proposal that we saw last year and is currently being built is more or less tied, in a way, tied to kind of that concept to have limited small-scale commercial within the vicinity of the intersection between South Point and US 27. So some of that is starting to come true. Okay. So looking to a bird's eye view, you'll notice here, most of the site is depicted. This also shows at least more or less a rough representation, not an exact representation, but a pretty good representation of where that new Lake Forest Drive street has been constructed and the right-of-way dedicated for that. So you can see that the site has been or is divided between two field areas, one that is adjoining US 27 and Lake Forest, the other just with Lake Forest frontage. And there's a drainage swale down the middle with some vegetation along that. Okay, and then some site photos for you. So here you can actually see the new street that was constructed. The aerial photography hasn't been updated yet to reflect that street. So you kind of have to imagine what's there. But these photos were taken on October 16th, so back in the fall. So you can see the trees that are on either side of the road. This is a look at that drainage swale that goes underneath Lake Forest Drive from the existing pond that's there and leads kind of in a northern direction, flows into Lick Run, which then flows into 4 Mile Creek off to the east. And here's a photo, look at that existing pond and the stormwater management structure that has been built there. So this was a city project in a sense. This road was built with TIF funds. And it also included a turn lane improvement along 27. So southbound motorists on 27 have a separate lane that they can enter in order to make a left-hand turn onto Lake Forest Drive. Okay. So diving into the site aerial. So again, this is a little under 12 acres in area. It's about 55% field, 45% wooded. There's approximately 564 feet of frontage along 27, little over 1,400 feet of frontage on Lake Forest. If you were to terminate it at the R4 zone, which is in close proximity to Lick Run, where it comes and intersects the site in this location. So the frontage is a little bit greater if you take it all the way up to that fine point that goes up to the annex development. And again, that's a 60-foot right-of-way width that was recently dedicated for that new street. The sanitary sewer, so there's currently no sewer available to the site. So in order to service the proposed uses, the sewer is going to need to be extended at the developer's cost. So that sewer, I at least understand it conceptually, that it will need to be extended from the wastewater treatment plant, which is to the north, along 4 Mile Creek and then along Lick Run, and then eventually joining up with Lake Forest Drive. I would guess roughly in this location here. I believe the infrastructure plan shows where that comes in. Okay. So here's a look at the submitted site plan. So the developer is showing 36 detached units, and those are divided between 2 different phases. So they intend on building the eastern phase first. They call that phase 1, and that's for a total of 24 units. Phase 2 is to the west off of this separate cul-de-sac, and that contains a total of 12 units. And the resulting density for this development is 3.02 dwelling units per acre. So that does fall within the original 2 to 4 dwelling units that was originally established for that very early preliminary PUD plan when it was under the county's jurisdiction. The R2A zone actually allows up to 7.26 dwelling units per acre. And if you do a rough approximation for how that translates out to dwelling units, if you take away 15% of the site is a good rule of thumb for area that's needed for infrastructure. So if you apply that rule, that equates out to roughly 73 units that could be potentially accommodated, at least under the zoning parameters. There's a lot of other factors at play, of course, with this site, not just the zoning, but if you just look at the zoning density aspect alone, the zoning can prescribe up to 73 units maximum potential. And one of the things that you may have caught in the applicant's letter is they identify that the individual lots, the individual units that are proposed for this development are known as, or identified as being virtual. So the idea there is that the lot lines that are shown in this proposal are not going to be actual lot lines. So as a condominium development, all of the common areas, anything that is not occupied by a unit, by an individual building, is going to be held in common. And there is proposed to be a homeowners association that will own those areas and maintain those areas. So this is not an actual subdivision, although it certainly is reminiscent of one. It looks very much like one, and once it is built, people will probably think of it as a subdivision. So in that sense, it's almost kind of a hybrid between what a subdivision would be and what a standalone single site plan development proposal would be. So, and that distinction has come into play quite a bit, at least in terms of reviewing the various aspects that go with this proposal. And I'll just mention for the time being, we have seen a submission come in for the site that's off to the east of Lake Forest. So this area over here, and that's a little bit more of a simpler proposal, less dense. They're proposing 20 individual lots over in that area, and are intending to have streets that hook up with these 2 intersections here. So basically turning those into 4-way intersections. So I just thought it'd be a good idea to mention that, especially since that application has already been formally submitted and will come to the Planning Commission in February. Okay. And this is a submitted rendering showing kind of a nice arts and crafts style for the units. So the applicant is proposing 2 to 3 bedrooms per unit, roughly 1 to 1.5 stories per unit. And I already mentioned the common areas, which those are going to be owned and maintained by the HOA. And the applicant does note in their letter, at least the desire or the intent to restrict rentals via the HOA. So that would be kind of the mechanism whereby they could impose some rental related restrictions. Okay, so now we're going to get into the design aspects. So the first one, probably the most substantial one that staff would like to address, is the access spacing between the cul-de-sac street and US 27. So this is kind of a blow up image of where we're talking about. So here's Lake Forest Drive, here's that cul-de-sac street, here's that other street in phase 1. So there's certainly plenty of spacing here between these 2 streets. However, our concern, and we share this concern with the city engineer, the spacing between that cul-de-sac street and the intersection with US 27, that's only shown to be about 133 feet, which we feel is probably not adequate enough, given that Lake Forest Drive is destined, if you will, to become sort of a main artery that's going to connect to a lot of future dwelling units, not just the ones that are proposed for this site, but other areas that are part of that original PUD as well. So we feel that there should be more spacing allocated here to provide for sufficient stacking distance if you've got cars that are waiting to turn left onto 27. Presently, it's not a signal of any kind. It's a stop sign. So, you know, motorists that are wanting to turn left onto 27 and go south toward Coleraine, they may have to wait a while before they're able to get a break so that they can make that turn. So we just feel that, you know, given looking to the future and thinking about, okay, how can we best set this up for future demand, future traffic that's going to have to take this route onto the nearest arterial, which is 27. We feel that this should be set up as best as we can for the future and allow for that additional room to where if there are additional improvements that need to be made, you know, in terms of increasing the number of turn lanes or widening the street, whether it comes to 27 or Lake Forest, that there's plenty of room to do that, and that there isn't going to be this interference from that local street connection. So nearby from that location, we're going a little bit to the north along 27. Another item that staff has noted in the report is the width of the right-of-way along 27. The right-of-way that exists right now, it kind of weaves back and forth a little bit. The distances vary. In this particular location, it goes down to about 29 feet, but then it widens to about 46 feet. And then I think it actually goes down to around 25 feet, a little further to the south once you get near Lake Forest. And if we are to look to our thoroughfare plan, which prescribes the adequate right-of-way widths per road classifications, you'll find if you look to the plan, it's identified as a principal arterial number 1 along US 27. It's a rural principal arterial. So that calls for a section that's 120 feet wide. So that equates to 60 feet on either side of the center of the road, what's called the center line. So we are asking the developer to dedicate their half of the 60 feet. So basically we're asking for areas that are deficient on the 60 feet, whether it be 29, 46, or 25, that everything just be made a parallel line that is 60 feet from the center line of 27 and stretching across the frontage of the site. And then just a note very quickly on the right-of-way. So we're not asking for additional right-of-way or anything like that along Lake Forest because that right-of-way was already dedicated. The city was responsible for that. So that's already a done deal, and there's not a reason to discuss that as it pertains to Lake Forest. So shifting gears here, the next topic is streams and drainage. So Lick Run is identified as a blue line stream per USGS. So it is a regulatory stream. It flows eastward to 4 Mile Creek. And hopefully everybody had a chance to review the comments from Butler Soil and Water. They recommend that there be a 75-foot setback from the banks of Lick Run to help preserve the riparian zone. So help to preserve the vegetation that's in that area. Streams, they kind of have a mind of their own. Sometimes they migrate from one location to another. So it's just a good idea to have sufficient buffers along those areas to help protect the ecosystem as well as the drainage and the flow of those streams, and also to help protect your future home buyers so that you're not having, erosion related concerns or flooding concerns that result from building a little too close to those streams. So we would echo the recommendation from Butler Soil and Water to have additional buffering along that stream. And here's actually a closer view. So the units in particular that we're concerned about are the ones that back up to Lick Run. So lot 14, or unit 14, I should say, which is in this location here, that's shown to be about 27 feet from the bank. And is also seems to be located on some of that steep slope area as well. So again, we'd like to have that buffered out to 75 feet. If you go further down to lot 18, there's a little bit more buffering distance there. That's about 56 feet, just to give you an idea on the buffering that we're requesting. With the stream that leads from the retention pond, which by the way was modified a bit by the construction of Lake Forest Drive. It's actually probably a little less than half of it went away. But that has the drainage structure that then leads under the road and into this, what I'll call a drainage way that then feeds into Lick Run. We have some concerns with the 4 units here that border the pedestrian bridge that's proposed, which by the way, we feel is a great feature that has been included. But unfortunately, it seems like these units here are a little too close for comfort to that drainage way and are along those steeper slopes. So we would recommend moving those units further back from that channel, or just adding some additional area to the open space and helping to better preserve that channel. Okay. So moving on to other environmental features and comments. So I will say this is overall as a concept, I feel like this is getting us to, a good point to saying, we like the concept. We like what the developer's trying to do here in terms of, the unit makeup and trying to fulfill a need for non-student housing. And we can see that some of these units are in a sense kind of tucked into the vegetated areas, which isn't necessarily a bad thing and can become kind of a nice amenity for future home buyers to have the vegetation kind of envelop or have this nestling effect to the units. So, but as you can see, we've marked the tree lines here, and you can see where those a lot of those units do kind of come come into that natural area. I'll also mention the developer's proposing 2 water quality basins, one to the north and one here toward the middle. And Butler Soil and Water is recommending geotechnical investigations, at least for the northern area. They haven't mentioned this area, and that's due to wet soil and slope risks. So I think there's a potential there that can be navigated in the form of a condition and can be sorted out when it comes time to submit the stormwater plans and details to our engineering division. They also had comments on the retention pond there to the south, which in a sense, this pond isn't more or less handling the drainage from this specific site alone. It's handling the water that's coming from the south and to the east, and then feeding its way into the site through that drainage way. So there isn't as much of a direct relevance of that pond to this particular proposal, but would definitely come into play with the development proposal off to the east, the one that of course we'll see in February for the 20 lots. So just mentioning that one as well. Okay, and the tree ordinance. So this is a fairly recently adopted set of provisions in our zoning code from last year. We are still in the midst of trying to determine the exact implementation of these provisions and how we can best accommodate the requirements that are contained in the new chapter, in chapter 1148. We can consider water quality basins as exempt areas, so we'll have to determine exactly how that may play out in terms of whether how we define those boundaries per se. But just to delineate based on the units and the infrastructure that's shown on this plan, the green areas here are depicting what the tree ordinance deems non-exempt areas. So these are areas that would either require a conservation easement or restriction of some kind to avoid the tree surveying requirements. So you have a legal means of saying that you can't go in there and disturb that vegetation, clear cut it, remove it, or you can do a survey of those areas and significant trees, those that are over 10 inches DBH, if they are removed, then they have to be replaced at a rate of 1 inch for every 2 inches caliper. But what the code also does specify is that any new trees that are planted, which there will definitely be new trees planted with this development, those can count or compensate for the trees that are removed from the non-exempt areas. So the developer is showing some buffering along 27 and Lake Forest Drive. So there's certainly trees that go with that, that are being located in parts of the site that presently aren't covered by any trees. So that's a gain in a sense. They are showing street trees along the cul-de-sac street as well as the main streets over in phase 1. And getting into the details, at least at a landscaping level, we feel that a lot of that can actually be reviewed at the final stage of the development. So for instance, we feel that there's probably going to need to be additional landscaping provided in that the central green area and not have that just be open lawn. So a lot of those details we feel can be hashed out, worked out at the final stage, and don't necessarily need to be pinpointed in excruciating detail, at least at this stage. And we also feel like the tree ordinance kind of goes hand in hand with the plan development requirement for a minimum of 20% open space, which that'll actually bring me to my next slide, which is dealing with the open space and the comparison of that with the buildable areas for the individual units. So I just took an area of the site here just as an example. This is, I believe it's sheet A-1 that has the aerial imagery underneath and the colored lines depicted. So what's shown on this example, so the green lines, those are those virtual lot lines, right? Those are sort of the imaginary, if we had to draw the line somewhere, that's where they would be, but those aren't actually going to be subdivided. But if we imagine that they were there and then we took setbacks off of them, so I believe it's 5 feet off the side, and then the front distance varies. I think it's anywhere from like 9 to 11 feet or so. It just varies depending on where the footprint has been placed. So those setbacks seem to be pretty clearly defined, but once you get to the rear of these lots, that's when there's kind of a question mark posed at that point, because it's hard to tell where the buildable area ends and the open space begins. And in our view, there shouldn't be an overlapping there. It should be one or the other. It should be areas are counting toward open space and are going to be preserved and are not going to be built upon, or these areas are in fact going to be buildable and you can situate the structure within those individual buildable area footprints that are defined. And without having lot lines and without knowing the precise location of where these units are going to be, because at least at this point, the preliminary stage, and the footprints that are shown, for these individual units, these aren't precise. I mean, these are just kind of best guesses, and there's various shapes that they have in mind. They're still working through the floor plan details, and there will be, various options that they intend for their future home buyers to engage, to modify, and add this or that to the footprint. So those footprints are going to fluctuate a little bit, and we understand that that's going to happen. But at the same time, we need to have a better sense or a better idea of what we're exactly approving at this stage in terms of where these units are actually going to be able to be built. So we need to have those parameters defined, and in addition, we need to understand where the open space is being counted. So we don't have, at least at present, we don't have exact boundaries to know, exactly what's being counted as open space, what's not being counted as open space. There's certainly areas that we know should count as open space, like the central green in phase 1. That's definitely open space. The 100-year flood limits that they've established, that's definitely open space. But then there's sort of this gray area when it comes to the back sides of these units that we just need to get a better sense for, what's actually being counted. And the applicant is saying that it's around 17% or so open space, which could potentially then be accommodated as a waiver request. It doesn't preclude that from being considered by the commission, but the first step is to understand exactly where we're counting those areas, where we stand in terms of the percentage, and once we agree on where that's being counted, then we can start to have that conversation about whether the open space should be reduced for the sake of having a larger area devoted to development. So with all of that, the recommendation at this point, again, we feel that this is a good proposal at a general level, but we feel like there's a lot of tweaks that need to be done. There's some revisions that we'd like to see happen. So at this time, we don't feel like we're in a comfortable enough spot to recommend approval. We think this can definitely be headed in the right direction, and especially once the commission is able to give direction to the applicant, we feel like we can get this to a spot that is potentially recommended for approval. But at least at this stage in the game, we feel the best recommendation we can provide at this point is to table the application. So this is primarily to give the applicant a chance to address that cul-de-sac intersection spacing, maybe even potentially investigate removing that intersection altogether, and maybe extending the street over from phase one over to phase 2, and not having the pedestrian bridge, but rather have pedestrian and vehicular access across that drainage way, and not having a second or third access point, I should say, off of Lake Forest Drive. And again, we feel the units should be buffered a little bit more from the streams and the steeper slopes. And then we do need that additional information on the buildable areas, the open space calculation, and getting us to a better position on the tree ordinance compliance in terms of establishing, what an appropriate area is going to be for that. What I imagine the developer will want to, do a conservation easement or set of restrictions rather than surveying the individual trees. So I believe that concludes at least the staff portion. I would like to mention, following the writing of the staff report, so the staff report says we hadn't received any public comments in writing. Since the writing of the staff report, we have received 2 public comments in writing, so I'd just like to touch on those very briefly. So the first one is from Ms. Sandra Moore, and she resides at 3849 Oxford Millville Road. And her letter indicated more of a neutral position on the development, had some concerns about the noise that's taking place right now with sports cars speeding down Lake Forest Drive, and was curious about sewer connectivity. The other written public comment was from Ms., and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this right, Ms. Tammy Kuginski, and she resides at 3926 Oxford Millville Road, and generally voiced opposition to the development and noted the previous plan for half-acre lots in this area. And I think that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Are there any board members who have questions about what Mr. Moore just covered?
In the area with the streams, where Butler County Soil and Water is recommending that 75-foot setback, it looks like there's some buildings that are actually sitting on the streams, sitting on the lick as proposed. What is the distance? So, but some of them are a reasonable distance. Do you have a sense of what the distance is of, for example, unit 22? How far that is, just so I can get a sense of the physical distance there.
I remember measuring that distance, and my understanding from this plan, and the applicant might be able to speak to this a little better than I could, but my understanding of this is sort of delineating sort of the general line of travel of that drainage stream. So that's not a regulated stream. That's just a drainage way that's leading into Lick Run. But nevertheless, yeah, you're right to point out it is shown pretty close to those footprints. I want to say, I mean, if I had to measure that really fast, I would say it's probably within 10 feet or so, maybe less.
Okay. And then can you give me a sense of the distance between, for example, like 36 and 23?
36 and 23.
So like how much space is there to work with there in terms of the general corridor between the two back lots or the back walls of these structures? That may be like 50 feet.
Okay, I see. So those are the ones that are up close to tucking into that intersection between Lake Forest and
yeah, I'm just kind of wondering about the general width of that space between the houses, between the back walls of the houses on the cul-de-sac and the homes on the next street over.
Based off the measurement from the cul-de-sac street to US 27, it appears to be plus or minus 120 feet.
Okay. All right. That was my question. Thank you.
But if I'm wrong, Mr. Moore, please correct me. It looks comparable to that distance, so that would be a fair guess. But I think those are great observations that I shared as well.
Yeah, I'm getting a read on it. It looks like it's about 125 feet or so from the back of the sidewalk along the cul-de-sac, stretching to the edge of pavement on 27. Just measuring off the plan here. And then the back sides of those units, 34, 35, those are right up against, actually, I guess I neglected to mention. So one of the requirements of the plan development is a 25-foot perimeter setback around the outside of the site. So the applicant is showing that, and they show that that's going to be a mounded landscaped area, but that setback does come up and touch the back sides of those units there on 33, 34, and 35. And if I was to get a reading here to the edge of pavement on 27, that's around 48 feet or so from the back sides of those units to the road pavement on 27.
Mr. Chair, this is Sam.
Yes.
Just a comment, just as a courtesy to the 5 virtual attendees, I just wanted to let you know you've got 5 attendees out there in the virtual audience.
Perfect. I appreciate that. All right. Any more? Go ahead.
I have just one more question. I believe that at present we don't have any affordable housing stipulation in our or requirement that would be directly applying to this housing. Is that true?
That's not entirely true. So we actually have a fairly recent amendment to our plan development chapter that specifies a goal for a diversity of housing options. So that's contained in the purpose statement for plan developments. So it's not a specific like prescribed requirement, but it is mentioned, and just due to the nature of planned development, which is more discretionary in nature, that's something that can be considered and can be part of the discussion.
That's great, but it's not a set aside that says, for example, 20% needs to be affordable or anything of that nature. So if we were to try to suggest that here, it would not be particularly defensible from in a legal capacity. Is that true?
If our legal counsel would like to jump in, I'm more.
I was writing a note down. So your question is, can we require affordable housing in the absence of a mandate? The answer is no, we cannot, but we can ask that the applicant consider it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Blackmar. All right. If there are no other questions specific to what Mr. Moore just presented, I will open the floor to Mr. Webb and his team.
Great.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of Planning Commission. So this is a pretty big project, and as we're all getting used to, Zach has done a very thorough job of reviewing it. And but all that being said, we'd like to sort of back up a little bit, kind of show you our concept and what we hope to achieve in this meeting this evening. So this is just kind of a bird's eye view, sort of a 3D model, kind of overall, just to sort of give you an idea of how the houses are placed and some sense of the berm arrangements and the street trees, just kind of give you a sense of the sort of development. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So as Zach pointed out, this is a condominium development of 36 single family units. It's in the R2A zoning district, and in our opinion is designed as a traditional neighborhood development, specifically as the comprehensive plan calls for. Our target audience is something less than large lot zoning and something better than duplexes, which would be allowed in this particular district. Our target is for empty nesters, some people we sort of call the before the Knowles crowd, people that are interested in maybe downsizing, but still living in a very nice neighborhood, and maybe not have to worry about maintenance, doing a little more travel, semesters abroad, things like that. We're hoping to keep the price point down to make it attractive to first-time home buyers, and obviously faculty we think might be attracted to this for the zero maintenance idea as well. And we've kind of chosen to do, based on sort of the feel of the wooded area out there, kind of an arts and craft inspired designs on the houses. And I should kind of preface this by saying, all of this sort of started with this notion of the long-term success and viability of Veriker Farms. Veriker Farms, I'm sure we're all familiar with. I, in fact, probably should have put a slide of their footprint on here. Veriker Farms, to give you an example, those units are in some cases less than 8 feet apart. They have no internal sidewalks. They have no front or rear yard setbacks. It's, in our opinion, handled beautifully through landscaping and careful design, and creates a very nice sort of arrangement. So we decided to sort of use that as our guideline, but to improve the things that we feel that Veriker Farms is lacking. First and foremost would be a lot of those houses feel like they are garages with houses that sit behind them, where you have long sidewalks walking down the length of the garage before you ever get to your front door. We've decided to sort of give ourselves a little more elbow room here, bring the house up a little farther so it looks a little more traditional, a little less like a garage with a house attached, and spread them out a little bit. We have used those virtual lot lines and virtual setback lines just to ensure that we want to make sure that we're greater than 10 feet in all cases from a setback standpoint. And to be honest, there was some consideration because we are in an R2 zone of connecting some of these. I'm sure some of us are familiar with some of the condo developments in Mason and Westchester and things like that, where they're sort of mixed between 2 and 3 family units, some standalone. Obviously, we could have perhaps increased our density in that case, but density was not really the goal here. The goal here was to try to create something that would be viable and sustainable over the long term, to use an example that's been successful for a long time in the city and try to improve on that. And we feel that we have a lovely piece of ground to do this on. As mentioned by Zach, everything will be controlled by a homeowners association, and in that allows you to set limitations on how many can be rented. First and foremost, these will be units for sale. These are not units for rent. Homeowners associations can set a maximum limit of numbers of rental units, because that helps the property values of all of your neighbors. I mean, your property is worth more if your neighborhood isn't 50% rental units. So we want to make sure that the property values are protected here. And the homeowners association, besides the anticipated job of managing the development and maintaining it, would also allow the ability to create some rules about occupancies and how the buildings can be used. So next slide, please. So as Zach pointed out, I mean, the concept here is, you can see we're kind of in this horn-shaped area. We have 2 big clearings. Hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to drive down there and take a look. These are really wide open clearings. And you can go to the next slide. You can see that we've essentially tried to drop the development basically right into those clearings. The homes have been located in the open areas between Lake Forest Drive and the Lick Run waterway. Sorry, it says Lick Rub there. That's not right. The development is designed as a private neighborhood, internally focused from US 27 and from Lake Forest Drive. So with all the discussion, I'm sure everyone read the staff report about perhaps we could eliminate the cul-de-sac, perhaps the buildings along Lake Forest Drive could actually face Lake Forest Drive instead of facing the center, and we could turn these into driveway lots off of Lake Forest Drive. It's simply not what we wanted to do in this development. Again, Verica Farms was kind of our model, having something more internally focused. And that's really what justifies the cost of the streets. When we talk about affordable housing, we can get 12 houses on a street. If we eliminate 5 of those houses, we're probably not going to build the street. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We can't keep them affordable when we start, cutting the numbers and cutting the amenities and things like that as well. Staff report kind of intimated that we were trying to maximize the density here. I just want to make sure that that point is made, that that's not the case. At an allowable density of 7.5 units per acre, we could literally almost double this. We're allowed to do 2-family structures. It's an R2 zone. In fact, through a PUD, we can do any type of residence. So we could, simply just put more units and have them connected. But honestly, we didn't feel like that was our market, because we wanted to have something a little more traditional in terms of neighborhood look, but with the availability and the opportunity to have zero maintenance, the condo seemed like the way to go. So next slide, please. So as Zach pointed out, and Bear Becker confirmed here this week, that we do in fact need a 60-foot right-of-way along US 27. So over the last week or so, we've kind of made a revision to this plan, giving that 60-foot right-of-way, or rather 120-foot right-of-way, 60 feet on our side of the road, to accommodate that. That has then changed a little bit of our housing footprints. It's actually moved the cul-de-sac farther away from US 27 by about 25 feet. And then we've kind of changed our unit arrangement in order to sort of make sure that those up there still fit. As it turns out, as we've been developing the plans that we intend to use for the project, these original footprints that I had laid out here 45 days ago are really quite generous. They were sort of based on a much bigger footprint than is really necessary. We've done a lot of market research recently on the scale of these so-called patio homes, and nice 2 and 3 bedroom units can be a lot less deep, so to speak. So I think that's going to help us stay off of the creek a little bit, and it also helps our arrangement down there on US 27. So our hope here is to be able to maintain the density, handle it by spacing and unit design. So from a bigger picture kind of concept here is that the intention is to allow input from the prospective homeowners on these units. Like a lot of these patio home developers, our intention is to offer 3 to 4 sort of standard plans. These can then be mirrored, reversed, kind of based on where they go. The individual purchaser would have the opportunity to decide if it's 2 bedrooms and a den, 3 bedrooms, if they want to throw an extra bedroom on the second story. So what we're trying to accomplish here is, a sort of custom designed opportunity as a condominium. So you have your lot area, we have our buildable areas, we've set sort of lot widths and setbacks in order to create a kind of rhythm of the street, so to speak. But we expect some flexibility for the potential buyers here. And so in order to not get too hung up on the actual footprints here at this point, because as I said, they're actually going to get significantly smaller as we move along. So next slide, please. So the site design, I apologize to Zach that I did not delineate our open space areas. That being said, everything that I draw, everything that Bear Becker draws is based on surveys here and based on AutoCAD, which is accurate to 10 or 15 decimal places. I don't make these areas up. These were drawn. I just didn't print the lines apparently, but I'm kind of trying to give you a sense here of what the open space is and where my 17.5% really comes from. So first and foremost, we should note that the perimeter based on our plan development chapter is not allowed to count toward any of my open space. So in this particular site, as we have it designed right now, what's sort of in that kind of yellow color represents over 2 acres of open space. It's about that 17.5%. Ironically, the green area, the setback that we're not allowed to count, is actually over 3 acres in open space. And what happens here is when you have a long and skinny lot, obviously we have a lot of perimeter here compared to a simple shaped lot. So in the end, out of our 12 acres, we've got 5 acres dedicated to open space and preservation as it stands right now. And again, that doesn't even account the areas in the buildings. We didn't really declare any open space behind buildings 17, 18, 16. There's a pretty big area there between the back of those units and the creek or the perimeter setback. So I think we're providing the open space that we can at this point. I think that our final number will grow a little bit, based on finalization of the footprints of the buildings, and then we can delineate a few more of these areas as we go along here. All that being said, even with our larger unit footprints as we're showing right now, we're still only at about a 31% overall lot coverage when 35% is allowable. We would expect that to decline as the units get smaller. And while we're kind of looking at this map, Zach brought up this notion of setbacks here and trying to kind of overlay setback requirements on a planned development, I think is really not appropriate in this particular case. The idea here is that these are not single family or duplex lots that would have front yard and rear yard setback requirements. This is similar to maybe a little cluster development where we feel like having big backyards is not really the concept here. Again, we're looking at Verica Farms as our kind of model and our target market. Backyards are not really that important to that particular demographic. So rear yard setbacks, we don't think are really that important. In fact, we're looking at kind of pushing these buildings pretty much up against the berms in some cases to kind of offer some noise protection and to kind of create a more centrally focused neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the site design and connectivity. So the idea here is specifically something different than a traditional subdivision. Zach had pointed out in one of his slides that we have 564 feet of right-of-way along US 27. If we were to simply develop this as an R2A development, we could just put 9 driveways down US 27 and just have driveway lots and build no streets whatsoever. If we put duplexes in that area, we would have 7 driveways, but we'd have 14 units going down there. So we decided to do something specifically different than that. And that's the idea of the internally focused. So the kind of picture down there at the bottom right is actually taken over in the Mason kind of Tylersville area, and it represents how we see our side of Lake Forest Drive with a berm, a tree lawn, and sidewalks. I apologize that the sidewalks weren't on the first presentation. I thought those were accounted for, but I had missed that. So there is absolutely an intention to have sidewalks along Lake Forest Drive. I'm going to let Etta talk about the sidewalks on US 27. But in the notion of trying to protect some of this kind of native vegetation in this native area, you know, we decided kind of not to drive over the top of it and thought, you know, we could create sort of an amenity with the pedestrian bridge to connect the two areas. Etta's going to show you some ideas we have about how we can combine our water quality feature in this bridge to sort of create a unique amenity for the property. And then also, while we're talking a little bit about trees, kind of as Zach pointed out, you know, building landscape berms, street trees, as we're showing here, you know, we should by far have a lot more trees than are required based on the ones that we're taking out. We had talked at one point about having a conservation easement, perhaps to follow the 100-year flood line. But after further visiting the site, and if you have been out there, you can see the trees that are in this sort of swale, or it's a stretch to call them trees. It's really scrubbed. There's a lot of dead ash in there, almost no trees over the 10-inch thing. You know, if a tree survey is necessary to prove that point out, I think we would probably do it. There's just simply nothing to be saved in that area. So nonetheless, we thought this would be an opportunity to improve it. This is kind of based on the idea that, you know, we'll put the houses in the areas that need improvement. We have big empty fields that could do well with houses, and we've tried to stay out of the trees and everything as much as possible. I'll let Etta talk a little bit more about the 75-foot setback off the creek as we get there. But we do have soil engineers involved here, and we are not the least bit concerned about the grade. I'm certain, you know, I know a number of you live in neighborhoods that back up to creeks or swales or ditches, whatever you want to call them. Often that gives you an opportunity for a walkout or windows on the lower level. It's something that people generally like. So our houses that are sort of up along that bank, we feel the bank is certainly stable, or we wouldn't propose them there. But we feel that actually is an opportunity for a unique design. And like I said, maybe some ability to finish some rooms on the lower level. And yeah, we just think that would, it is an opportunity, not a problem to be solved, so to speak. So next slide, please. So I guess we'll turn it over to Etta now to talk about the connectivity issues.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. My name's Etta Reed with Bear Becker, and we'll be the engineer and surveyor on this project. And Scott did a great job kind of talking about how we got to the concept that we did, as well as some of the zoning and planning issues. And what I'd like to do is just kind of touch on some of the technical aspects and concerns that have been raised. As Zach had mentioned, sanitary sewer is not on the site yet. It is currently under design. It is being run from the treatment plant up to the north along 4 Mile Creek and up Lick Run. And what that sanitary trunk main will do, it'll open up all this land, really the remainder of South Point Crossings for development, because right now there's no gravity sanitary sewer to serve any of that property at this time. So I wanted to hit on that. And then next, I want to hit on and touch base on the access point, the first cul-de-sac. I don't have an exact exhibit, but as staff had mentioned, it's about 133 feet from 27 to the cul-de-sac. And with the additional 60 foot, providing the 60-foot half on 27, we did have to relocate and shift that cul-de-sac about 25 feet, which would get us up around the 160 foot of spacing, and what we would call 160 foot of space available for vehicles to stack or queue, waiting to get onto 27. When we designed Lake Forest Drive, we had to get permits from both the city of Oxford as well as the ODOT, the state of Ohio, and they required that we perform a traffic impact study. That way we could determine, did we need, did Lake Forest Drive need to be 2 lanes, 4 lanes, 3 lanes? And then also, were there any turn lanes needed on 27? And as Zach had indicated, there, we did provide a southbound left turn lane on 27 for individuals wanting to turn onto Lake Forest Drive. As a result of the study, we were not required to add any additional laneage on Lake Forest Drive. The traffic study that was performed for that intersection assumed that there would be 116 single-family homes and another 90 empty nester young professional homes on the remainder of South Point Crossings. So essentially it accounted for 206 residential units that have yet to be constructed. And before you, we're asking for approval of 36. With those 206 units, they were all assuming to use this entrance at Lake Forest Drive. Now, as you know, they can also come out on South Point Parkway at a traffic signal, but for the purposes of analysis, we assumed they would all use Lake Forest Drive. When we did that, based upon the capacity analysis that we do, only in the AM and the PM peak hour, which is when individuals are going to and from work, the maximum distance that we would need to allow for people to stack or wait to get onto 27 was for one vehicle, which would be about 25 feet. So by providing 160 feet approximately with the new location, it's going to be more than adequate to serve the needs of vehicles wishing to turn on to US 27 in the future with the full build out of South Point Crossings. So we feel very comfortable in the location. We don't anticipate any issues with future stacking needs in that area. The next thing I want to talk about is pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, which is this exhibit here. Shown in the yellow dashed is the existing sidewalk or multi-use paths that have been constructed to date within the area. There are some also, within level 27 in the annex, but I don't anticipate, those are kind of more private and internal to those developments. I'm more focused on the more public walkways. And then we are proposing to install concrete walk along both sides of all our streets internal to the development, as well as along the west side of Lake Forest Drive from the cul-de-sac all the way up to South Point Parkway. What this will do is allow our residents a safe, actually a very beautiful way to go from their home up to the new convenience store that's under construction. And then they can actually get on 27 on the walk and the path and walk north up and get to go to Pepper Park and get on the Oats Trail. So it's a very safe, pleasurable walk internal to the development. We have some concerns with putting a walk on 27, and I kind of want to go through some of those. For starters, the ground between our frontage on 27 and Century 21 to the north is all located within the township. And so there's about a 935-foot gap there that's in the township and has a narrow right-of-way. If you could go to the next slide, please. This really kind of does a good job of depicting how narrow we're talking about here. Right now, the road, the bridge, just due north of our property on 27, the roadway itself is only about 20 feet wide. There's a 7-foot shoulder on both sides. This is clearly inadequate for a pedestrian to walk on. So in order to put a walk further north to go up and connect to the existing walk, you would have to add either another pedestrian bridge or widen this existing bridge, which was just had significant work done on it recently. If you could go to the next slide, please. So there's a 935-foot gap that's in the township, and that property it's very unlikely that it would ever be placed into the city. We have inadequate right-of-way. The right-of-way along those 5 parcels in that 935-foot gap is only 30 feet wide on the half, which is just not enough room to put the road, get an adequate shoulder, put a tree lawn, and the walk. And then, the bridge is inadequate. So we feel we're proposing to install all this additional walk along our frontage, and then also along the frontage of the annex to connect to South Point Parkway, because we feel that's a much safer and a much better walk for the residents of this community moving forward. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I want to hit on a couple of the comments that Butler County Soil and Water had brought up. When Lake Forest Drive was constructed, it was a joint project with the city of Oxford and Four Leaf Development. Obviously, it's Four Leaf's ground. It was with TIF dollars. The city and Four Leaf hired an environmental and a geotechnical firm known as S&ME. They've done a lot of work within and around the city of Oxford, so they're very familiar with the soils that we deal with in the city of Oxford. They not only worked on Lake Forest Drive, but they are also doing the work for the convenience store that's currently under construction. So when we received these comments from Butler County, I immediately reached out to them because they're the experts. Please tell me, or, should we be concerned about what the county is saying or not? What do we need to do to change our plan to address these concerns if they are real concerns? And so with regards to the geotechnical aspect, I want to start there. The soils in this area are very cohesive and they are not highly erodible. We did not have to do anything to modify the soils or do any excessive work to construct Lake Forest Drive. They believe that will be the case when we develop this. Would you hit a pocket of bad soil? Absolutely, you do that everywhere. That's not unusual, but we can work around it. They do not believe there'll be any insurmountable issues with regards to the soils. So as part of the design phase, we will work directly with them and address the concerns that Soil and Water have and get some borings in that area. In particular, they were concerned about the water quality basin, which is shown in green to the north. That's a water quality basin. They had referenced in their letter a retention basin. There is a difference. The retention basin is what we have as the existing pond that's out there. It holds water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not what we're proposing. In that location, we're actually proposing what they call a water quality basin, which will be dry, except when it rains. And the purpose of that is to filter the water so that before it gets to Lick Run, all the sediment has had an opportunity to settle out. So talking with S&ME, they did not foresee an issue with creating a water quality basin in that location, given the existing soils that we dealt with. Matter of fact, if you just look up on the opposite side of Lick Run, there was actually a detention basin that was constructed with the original development back in 2005. And that basin has been in place since that time, and that has not had any erosion or other type of structural issues. With regards to the suitability of the existing pond to be used for retention, it actually is being used for retention today. It does receive a lot of water from off-site as well as some from on our site. What we are proposing to do is expand it for both this development and the development that Zach alluded to that will be coming in next month before you, to accommodate the detention, or retention for both sides of the street. So we will accommodate the retention in this pond by expanding it and modifying the outlet structure. This pond has been modified once before. It's over 20 years old. It was modified to accommodate Lake Forest Drive. Again, we do not foresee any issues. SNME, we will work directly with them to make sure everything's done correctly and in accordance to any environmental and geotechnical guidelines they provide. While I'm talking about water quality and retention, I do want to talk, we are providing another water quality basin, and that's the one right by the pedestrian bridge. If you could go to the next slide, please. Since that will be in a very visible area, we did not want to just provide a depressed area that'll be in someone's backyard and highly visible from the pedestrian bridge. So what we're proposing there is to do more of a rain garden water quality feature. What you see here is a picture of a water quality basin that we did up on the University of Dayton's campus in their Central Mall area. As you can see, it's beautiful. I would love to have that in my backyard, especially if the HOA is going to maintain it, and I wouldn't have to, but it'll just be a nice amenity for the, as you walk across that pedestrian bridge, and it provides a great feature and a necessary requirement that we have within the development. And the last thing I want to hit on is the 75-foot stream setback. The 75-foot stream setback is not an Ohio Department of Natural Resources or an Ohio EPA or the Army Corps of Engineers requirement. This is a requirement that Butler County actually has in their regulations, in their flood damage prevention regulations. However, since we are the city of Oxford, you have your own flood damage prevention regulations, and they do not contain a buffer requirement. When we deal with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Ohio EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, they do not have like a standard 75 feet, 50 feet setback. Their requirements when you are developing adjacent to regulated waterways such as Lick Run is that you do not grade beneath what they consider the ordinary high water mark. And what that is that is the level at which the water is the ordinary high water mark. How high does it normally get under a normal rain, not the 100-year rain event, and not just your, a little trickle, but kind of your average rain event. They do not let you do any kind of work below that elevation. If you do, you have to get a permit from them. Additionally, they do not allow you to, during construction, allow sediment to get into their streams. So we will be required to do obviously erosion control, which is required by the city also, to make sure we don't allow sediment to go into the Lick Run. So the 75 foot is a Butler County requirement. It is not Oxford, ODNR, OEPA, or Army Corps. So what we would like to do is we would request that we be held to the 100-year floodplain, the 100-year flood line. That would be our kind of stream setback. We understand the need to preserve the riparian corridor. We're not, that's not our goal here, is to denude behind these homes. But we want some flexibility, as Scott had mentioned, so that the homeowner can come in and pick the type of home they want, the depth of home they want, and the extra, do I want a sunroom, do I want a deck? We want to work with the topography that's there. And so by going with a 75-foot setback, you're really at the front of like home, like lot number 14, you're pretty much right at the front of that home. only the garage could be constructed. Same with 15. It gets better for, the rest of the lots. So it really impacts the site there. Whereas I think if we are provided the opportunity, we could do some beautiful walkouts with some great living spaces down below and work with topography in those areas. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott.
Okay, Zach, if you wouldn't mind, if you could jump back to slide number 4 for just a brief second. That's great, thank you. So as you can see behind these buildings here, you see the faint green line that follows the Lick Run Creek bed. That is the 100-year flood line, and that has been crucial to our design here. Besides what Etta was speaking about, the normal water height here that we have to deal with, we also have a 100-year flood line here, and you can see that we have purposefully kind of located this entire development to try to save as much of the trees as we can, but more importantly, nothing is anywhere near this 100-foot flood line. We feel like that is the standard to be used. Yes, there's some grade and things like that on some of the back of these lots, but as Etta pointed out, it's something that not only can we handle, but would likely be an opportunity, I think. So thanks for going back there. Let's we'll just finish up now, if you don't mind moving on to slide number 13, where we left off. So since Zach didn't go through his decision standards, I thought I would touch on those briefly. Obviously, this is an excerpt of the decision standards, the ones like, is it allowed in this zoning district? I didn't bother repeating here. The ones that I think are germane to the discussion tonight. Does the site plan satisfy the general intent of the zoning code? We feel that it does. And by doing it as a planned development, as opposed to just simply putting in streets and creating lots, we're able to have better control over the density and also the look of the development entirely. Subsequently, we feel that it is compatible with the comprehensive plan. It's pretty much exactly what the traditional neighborhood housing calls for, that section in the land use chapter. And we feel that the condominium market in particular is very underserved in our community. So it presents a new sort of a housing type here. We feel that the size and shape are sufficient for the development. As we said, we've done our best to protect the trees, the waterways, to create pedestrian connectivity, all in there. As Etta pointed out, there will be significant expense for public facilities as it has to be brought up literally from the plant. So that will be at the developer's expense. Subsequently, number 10 says it's not at the city's expense. The developer will be providing that up there. We feel that this design is harmonious to its surroundings, and through a planned development and sort of houses for sale choices for potential buyers to make, we can control what the development is going to look like as well. We feel that the traffic, as Etta just addressed, is more than adequate. The roads, the turn lanes, the stacking spaces that are provided. And we do not feel that we are going to result in the complete elimination of an existing mature tree canopy. Hopefully, if some of you had the opportunity to drive out Lake Forest Drive, on the south side of Lake Forest Drive, there is a legitimate tree canopy. There's lots of old growth trees, lots of huge trees. As I pointed out on this side, it's mostly scrub trees and a lot of dead ash. We don't really have a big tree canopy. We have a little bit of vegetation that we're going to inch into a little bit, but we're certainly not destroying a tree canopy. So, and then final slide, please. So staff had presented some concerns for which they felt this proposal should be tabled. And I think, we've addressed those, and I'd like to spend a minute just talking about that. Staff suggested maybe we should move the cul-de-sac intersection back farther from 27. In fact, we did that, maybe not as significantly as they might have anticipated, but I believe that ETA and the traffic studies that have been done out thus far sort of bear out our position that to move it any more than that would just simply be excessive. It would likely cost building lots and make the road just simply not cost effective to build. Number two, incorporating the wider stream setbacks and moving the building footprints off the steeper slopes. We feel like we've addressed that. We've engaged soil engineers. We have Bear Becker. We have respected the 100-year flood line. And keep in mind that our footprints that we're showing right now are generous compared to what the actual footprints of the houses will likely be. And lastly, providing additional information on buildable areas, open space calculation, and tree ordinance compliance. So the open spaces are shown, but it looks like I hit a typo there. They've been shown, but they do remain below the 20%. That being said, we have about 150% of the requirement in our perimeter. So of our 11 acres, we have over 5 acres of either perimeter or open space or 100-year floodplain or all of the above that simply won't be built on. We feel like, we've certainly met the intent of the code here. I can provide Zach with some additional lines on the survey that he can do his own calculations, but at this point we are below the 20%, not significantly, but enough that it perhaps needs to be a waiver. But we would like you to consider why, in fact, we are in that position. So further, because our buildable areas will shrink, it's likely that our open space will grow. And while every attempt has been made to preserve the existing trees, the exception in the tree ordinance for building and development areas would apply. So we're allowed to, take out trees and vegetation in the buildable areas and 15 feet around them. And we believe that the berming and the street trees and landscaping that will end up being here will far exceed the replacement requirement for those trees that we took down if they are in fact there. So staff also made a few conditions, which we are certainly willing and in favor of. The building height regulated by the underlying zoning district at 35 feet. There's no reason that a story and a half should get anywhere near 35 feet. It's not our intention to have one giant house there. We want to keep them all similar. A variety of dwelling unit types and sizes. As I kind of pointed out, we're looking to have a huge amount of variety here in dwelling types and sizes. Essentially people would start the process by choosing their location, rather than looking at that as a house footprint or a house plan on number 14, it's buildable area number 14. And then we can start, offering them a variety of plans, unlimited customization. And keep in mind also that if you'll recall back from some of the drawings that you've seen, we have some houses, footprints that are narrow and deep and some that are shallow and wide. And there'll be certain lots, as we have in place there where we can't put a long and deep house on certain lots. You won't have the same choices on some lots as you do on others. And that's sort of by design also to sort of keep it with a little more variety inside the development itself. And again, compared to Verica Farms, we don't want, once you get inside the development, just to see a bunch of garages and then you're kind of trying to find front doors that are buried back inside there. The landscaping plan will follow. I think Zach said you can make that a condition that we'll take up with the final. And then appropriate lighting, the fire department asked, and Zach did too. We haven't shown it yet, but our intention is obviously to have street lighting on all of these streets, meeting our current zoning code requirement, nothing over 16 feet. With an arts and crafts style, we're not going to put big commercial Kroger looking light fixtures in there. They'll be appropriate to the pedestrian scale of the development. So we've had a lot of information tonight. There's a lot here to unpack perhaps. Obviously, our clients would like to proceed. This is a long process. We'll be back, assuming we leave here this evening with a vote, we'll take it on to City Council. We'll have the opportunity to address any of your conditions or concerns even before we get to city council. And then obviously we have the entire final process where all of your questions about the firming up of footprints and open space and things like that can be addressed. So we would like to leave here tonight with a recommendation to city council for this development, in its concept, with some more details to follow perhaps. But at this point, we would like to maintain our density and maintain our road arrangement, because we just think it's better than just putting a simple subdivision in this location. So I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
All right, at this time, I will entertain any questions that board members have. I see Mr. Dana.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yes. With respect to the variety of dwelling units, and I'm referring both with what Mr. Webbs gave, but also the packet on page 08, if you have access to that in the commentary. And you have spoken of a variety of housing types. And I guess what I don't really grasp well enough is, what are the incentives for that? How does somebody approaching this development bring to bear a kind of a customization which results in the variety of housing types which are recommended, and which are, by the way, in the code, the PUD code itself? I just don't get that. That's one question. The other one has to do with you chose to utilize approximately half of your density rights, and that is in here. You had double that amount you have now. I just would look for you to please to comment on what exactly motivated you to do that with this particular proposal. The applicant has chosen to utilize approximately half of the density rights. And the third point that I have like to come forward with is with the point that Mr. Webb, Mr. Moore raised, and that has to do with rear-loaded garages. The front-loaded garage says his aspect currently improved for all 36 units is probably the aspect that contradicts the most within the TND concept, the front garage. So those are three items which I would appreciate your addressing. Thank you.
Okay, can I address those now, or are we going to do these?
Well, that's up to
Yes, if you could answer Mr. Dana's questions.
Okay, so the idea of the housing type, Steve, is just, when I say a variety of housing types, I don't mean we're going to have, some of one style or another, or some connected, some not. I mean, we're offering variety to the particular homeowners. Like I said, we spent a lot of time looking at the model of Veriker Farms. They all have somewhat similar footprints. There's a couple units out there that actually do have maybe a kid's bedroom or guest room or something on the second floor. So that's an option. With the grade that we have there, we have the option for some basement finishes. We aren't going to set a minimum size here. So, I mean, literally a person could choose to build a 1-bedroom, 3-office house if they wanted to. I mean, it's, the variety is sort of within type. So it's not like, we're going to have single family and multifamily or anything like that.
I understand that. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just, we're trying to accommodate a variety in terms of who our market is. That, if it were a family, maybe having 3 bedrooms is appropriate. If it were empty nesters, maybe 1 bedroom, 1 office, 1 bedroom, 1 den, that sort of a flexibility in terms of housing type is what we're talking about. With regard to the density, I think that I tried to make that evident in our first slide. We just simply tried to put the houses where we could. We have, there's a lot of land there. Some of it is in the floodplain. Some of it includes Lick Run. Some of it includes this drainage swale coming off the retention pond. We have right-of-way issues. We have perimeter setbacks. So that sort of limited the physical area of the site which could be built upon first and foremost. then I think maybe the more important question here is, given that we have density rights of 75 and single family room for 36, why didn't we group them? I mean, why didn't we push them closer together? I mean, we could have made them narrower. We could have made them as dense as Veriker Farms. We could have made them more dense. We could have made them, like the ones out by the bowling alley. I'm not sure what that one's called, on the corner of 732. Not Chestnut Hill, but the ones on the west side there that are connected. I mean, we could have done groups of connected buildings instead of standalone buildings. It was just a marketing choice, honestly, that we felt that the market that we were targeting was not transient, more long-term. So maybe connected units were not as marketable as freestanding units. So that being said, all of the things that we laid out, what part of the land can we build on? What are our goals? What housing types do we need? Do we want to do duplexes or single families? Do we want them as close together as Veriker Farms or farther apart? All of those decisions came into the result, which is, we got 36 units here. And even at the 36 units, staff and perhaps engineering or somebody like that would like to see us whack about 10 of them off. And, we just don't feel that that's viable at that point. So.
Right, but I was referring, Scott, the other point, please. Statement that's made on page 12 of our packet, which is the front loaded garage aspect is currently proposed for all 36 units, is probably the aspect that contradicts the most with the TND concept. That is that set? Is that intractable, that there will be the front loaded garage aspect currently imposed? I mean, that's a concern, at least for Mr. Moore.
Yeah, it is absolutely set at this point. I mean, that would cut our density in half once again, to have lots wide enough to have a driveway past them, turn around behind them.
Sure.
We're pushing the house up to where the grades are. And, and honestly, I disagree with Zach on that particular point. I have the comp plan open here. Traditional neighborhood development doesn't mention rear loaded garages in the comp plan. It's pretty rare in subdivisions that we actually do that. So certainly in lots this narrow, we just simply don't have the land area or the lot coverage or anything else to take a driveway for each house all the way around the back, have room to turn around back into your garage, stay off these slopes. It's just simply not doable.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other board members who have questions for Mr. Webb? I do have one question, and this may be for staff. So Mr. Moore, Mr. Perry, feel free to jump in, but I'd like Mr. Webb to answer it. With relation to the setback that Ms. Reed talked about with it of Butler County versus EPA, ODOT, so on and so forth. Could you help the board understand what the difference or ramifications are if this is treated as, if this PUD is one parcel for an HOA? Parts of the 100-year flood go onto the parcel, and being somebody who lived in a floodplain and had the luxury of paying FEMA for flood insurance, I'm always curious, would any alterations of the building or any modifications to the plan as suggested change any obligation for the HOA or individual houses to have to pay for, or is there any impact on a flood insurance equation based on some of the suggestions from the Butler County folks?
Let Ed answer that one.
I can chime in on that, and then Scott, obviously, if you want to add to it. Okay, this is not a FEMA mapped floodplain in this area. FEMA's mapped floodplain ends at 4 Mile Creek. It actually goes up a short distance on Lake Run, but it does not come all the way up here. What this is that when we did the design of the basin on the opposite side of the creek that I mentioned that was constructed in 2005, and as part of the design of the bridge for Lake Forest, we had to determine what the 100-year flood elevation, if you want to call it the 100-year flood elevation, and the limits of that, so that we didn't put homes in it, and so that we knew how high to elevate the homes above, so that they would not flood. You know, when I'll be honest with you, you know, the way I envision this happening, when Scott and I will work hand in hand when we design the homes for these lots and grade them out. And what we'll need to do is to make sure that those homes are set at an elevation such that the water has a flood route and it's not into the lower level of these homes. So our goal will be to try and get the water to go over Lake Forest before it comes into the homes. So we'll have to work very closely on that, but FEMA will not be involved with any of these homes. We're not near the FEMA mapped floodplain.
Okay, so the 100-year designation was for your calculations, correct?
Correct. It was so that we could establish a boundary on Lick Run so that we did not put homes into it, and so that we knew what that elevation had to be when we start setting elevations on these homes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other board members? Mr. Bracken?
Yeah, I wanted to continue with that. I don't know if you have the information on hand, but do you know how you calculated your 100-year flood zone? Because as we know with climate change, historic 500 years, now 100 year, 100 years, often 20 year. And so if you just go by old estimates, it's often not sufficient for what we've seen over the last 30 years. So I was wondering how you calculated your 100-year floodplain.
Scott, your city engineer, Mr. Otto, does have all the analysis. Drainage is not my expertise. So unfortunately, I cannot give you the intimate details of how it was calculated, but we'd be more than happy if Mr. Otto can't locate those. We can put his fingertips on them. We can definitely get that information, but it was using like HEC-RAS and the normal, it was updated since 2005 because of the bridge.
All right.
If no one else,
Mr. Dana?
a question, I have one additional one, but favor others before me. All right. I would like to please direct this question. This is one that I think you may have touched on, so you have to forgive me if I mention what you think you've already solved, but I'm referring to our packets with respect to the elimination of existing mature tree canopy. And Mr. Moore writes, not enough information is known at this point to verify compliance with the city's recently adopted tree ordinance or minimum open space requirements, 20% for a planned development. A clear distinction must be made between buildable areas for homes and areas devoted to open space. Now, in one of your slides, did you draw attention to that very clear distinction or not? Or should it in fact be drawn?
I think what I said was that it was calculated accurately, but its delineation line was not provided to Zach. But there is a delineation line by which I calculated the areas that are listed on the submittal. So, so perhaps Zach hasn't seen that line because I didn't give it to him, but it's not that it doesn't exist.
Okay.
All right. Any other board members have any questions for Ms. Reed or Mr. Webb? Mr. Bracken?
Sorry, I think one more. In the northeastern portion where you have a water quality basin, have you guys already cleared the trees from that area? Okay, thanks.
There's been no clearing done other than what was required to build the road. There's no work on this site. Right now, there's actually some stockpiling of some dirt on that lower open field. That's a temporary arrangement for the construction of the gas station. They're just stockpiling dirt there to get it out of the way, and they'll redistribute it back on the site or haul it away when the time comes.
Does that mean that 200-foot swath that went from the pond towards Lick Run is still up? In the pictures, it looked like it was down, but I guess the picture could have been taken past that point.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Would it help to see a map? Or
between the pond in which you built the road through, and then it connects to.
Are you talking about our swale with the little right there at the bottom here?
Where the stream runs out from the the pond into Lick Run. There was basically like a 200-foot swath of trees there, but I don't think, well, we could argue whether that's a sufficient canopy, but a more natural area there than open field.
Well, I have two comments to that. One, to call that a stream is a bit generous. It's just kind of a messy swale, and the aerial photographs are a little bit deceiving. As I said, if you were to go out there and take a look, there's only a few trees that are over 35 feet, and they're dead and are ash. I mean, it looks like a lot of vegetation there, but most of it is honeysuckle and not significant trees. There's truly not a tree canopy along that swale. There is maybe more of a tree canopy back along Lick Run, but along the swale is pretty scrubby, honestly.
So I actually think that's pretty accurate. While I haven't been out to the site, I've looked at the street view and I agree that there's not a sufficient canopy there, but it definitely is more of a natural area. And so, you might not have had a lot to work with, but also I think the trees that you've managed to keep up in this design also isn't necessarily significant because it's stuff that already has to be there because of buffers around borders and streams. And the only area of significant woods that I can see now is that northeastern section, and that seems to be going to be turned into a water quality basin. And I would love for that to remain more natural if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. All right, unless there are any other questions, Mr. Perry, you said we have some members of the public who are on. Will you see, are there any hands raised? Actually, I should probably give a second because that was a pretty quick turnaround for folks.
No, it's okay. There's 3 left. A couple had left. I don't know if you want to close your, move to public comments, or that's all part of the same discussion. So I don't see.
We're still in public session, so they would, if I'm not mistaken, they would have to provide their comments before we close public session and discuss as a board.
I don't see any with hands raised.
All right. Well, there doesn't seem to be any public comment, so I will entertain a motion to close public session.
So moved.
I second.
Mr. Keebler, seconded by Mr. Dana. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All members indicated aye, so we are out of public session. Now we're into board discussion, and unless there's any objections from our legal counsel or Mr. Perry, I would like to entertain board discussion and get the perspectives of folks. And then if there's any questions that come up along the way, I'm happy to engage appropriate folks. Ms. Rosenberg.
Yeah, I just wanted to are we in the discussion now?
Yeah. I was,
Good.
I want us to have discussion and then we can move forward with any logical motions.
Okay, fantastic. I do
wait, real quick. I'm really sorry. Before we discuss, Mr. Perry, would you give a very brief synopsis of what a preliminary plan development? Mr. Webb had indicated that we would vote on it, it would go to council, and then he alluded to final plans and designs. Could you very quickly help us understand what that means and if and when and how that may come back to us or the council?
Sure, be glad to. So the preliminary PUD process is just that, to give, it's more than a concept, but it's not something where land can be divided and sold. So it's kind of in the middle of those two things. And it would, before it could come back to Planning Commission, the preliminary plat would have to be approved by council. And then if it is, then a more refined, more detailed version would come back in the form of a final that would go through the exact same process, review and recommendation to council. And at that point, then it can be recorded, and then it can be divided, lots can be sold, and the construction can begin.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Rosenberg, I appreciate your patience on my forgetfulness.
You're fine. The random comment that I have is I can confirm what Scott said about the trees. I tromped around today. It was kind of fun. I suspect that there are some nicer trees back by Lick Run and in some of the areas that can't be built upon at all. but it is pretty scrubby. So just wanted to say that was my observation. What I wanted to bring up is, this area, this specific geographic area of 27 South outside of town is very fraught with bad feeling among the public in some ways because of level 27 and the annex being built in ways that were not originally stated as how they would be built and who the people that would be living there would be. And so, there's this bad feeling, and I've certainly seen in the public statements being thrown around about this area this particular development as well. And so even though Scott said that the homeowners association could specify, limitations to rentals, my suggestion would be that, like some other recent developers in our past year or 2, 3 years, that they actually, the developer agree to the process of the neighborhood conservation overlay, because that would be an act of good faith. I mean, I can tell, obviously, this isn't student housing. Obviously, this is, sorry to say, not even affordable housing, but I think it does fulfill a need in Oxford. I low key kind of want to move there myself right now. Also, actually, I'm just going to tangent to speak to something else that Scott said. I do love having a walkout basement. Every one of my neighbors on Acorn Circle can attest to having a very little backyard and a very nice view over whatever creek that is right behind us. But I want to just get back to that. I really think that it would be an act of good faith for this developer to go into the process of having a neighborhood conservation overlay.
It helps if I unmute. All right. Mr. Keebler.
I had about 4 things written down here that I was concerned about. The setback off of 27. And it appears that is taken care of. The driveway being too close, I think, with what Etta said about the traffic study and how much is required and what that showed. And then another 25 feet helps that. And I think that's preferable to having 5 driveways in there, which I think could be done by right. So that doesn't bother me anymore. I was concerned about connectivity because there's no way you can put pedestrians out there on 27 in that 900 and some feet that the city doesn't control. And so I'm glad to see the connection to South Point Parkway. I would hope you could also connect the sidewalk to the sidewalks at the annex, because if you don't, there's about a 30-foot wide stretch in there of grass that nobody's going all the way. If they're biking or stuff or walking, nobody's going all the way to South Point. They're going to cut across that. And so hopefully you could connect to the sidewalks on that private street. I would certainly like to see that. As some other people said, comment I hear most from people in this town is we'd like some condos, individual homes. We'd like to see more Veriker Farm, etc. The Craftsman style, I like the fact that even though the houses are going to be different, they're all going to be a similar style. I think it would be very attractive and would work. I know that Steve asked about the density. There's a big difference between the density that a zone allows within the gross square footage of the lot and the density that's buildable. And I guess I'm glad to see that they're individual homes as opposed to being duplexes and triplexes. I think that makes it attractive, and it certainly provides more open area, even though it may not be it's still green space. If you got 10 foot between the homes, that's a lot more than they have at Verica Farms. And boy, those things go on the market and they're sold the next day. So that shows the popularity of this type of thing. I really think that we should go ahead. I don't see any reason to table it. It's the preliminary signs. The changes we've seen tonight were all improvements and the commitments that I think Mr. Webb made. And I'd like to see the conditions that Zach originally came up with all be included, but that it be approved with those preliminary, with those conditions, and let it go forward, because I think there's no reason to hold this up for another month or two. And I think that becomes really frustrating in many cases, and let it go forward. And with the conditions, I think I think they've been addressed, and they will be addressed. And if they're not addressed, we won't approve the final. So there.
You're muted.
You're muted, Corey.
I was pointing at Mr. Bracken, and then I believe Miss Blackmar had her hand up. And
Yeah, I'd
did,
like, if I could, to ask if staff would consider the conditions met.
I'll jump in
From
there.
what you've heard tonight.
I don't think that we would have enough time to say that affirmatively. I think that Mr. Keebler is correct. The process of having the final would, give us some more comfort. But typically, we work with Scott and Ed on a regular basis, and if we'd have had some of this information a few days ago, we might be a little more confident. But I think it's more of just a verification. The engineer that Ed made reference to, we'd like to look at that, read through that. We'd like to run the setback by the city engineer as far as from 27. I don't know what your comfort level is as far as whether that's something that's just a trust and verify, or if it's something that might need some further analysis. That's really up to you. So I don't feel 100% confident, but I think Mr. Keebler is correct that there's still going to be more reviews in the future. So I'll just leave that up to you all.
Mr. Moore, do you have anything to add? You don't have to, but if you do, I want to give you the opportunity.
Yes, I do. In fact, yeah, I would agree with everything that Sam presented. And then I would also just remind the commission that I think there's a few more points that need better clarified in terms of direction from the commission. And those are what the commission desires in terms of sidewalks, street trees, and street lights along Lake Forest Drive and US 27. So just wanted to make it clear what staff's recommendation was to just have sidewalks along 27, but only for the frontage of the subject site. So not extending a sidewalk off-site to reach the gas station site at South Point and 27. So just to have sidewalks along the 27 frontage alone, no street trees and no lights. But then along Lake Forest Drive, we'd like to see along that entire frontage leading up to South Point Parkway and connecting into the annex. And I think Mr. Keebler made some good points about some other connectivity to the sidewalks there in the annex. I think we'd like to see that as well, to see those connections be done, to have those sidewalks put in, and then to see the street trees planted and the street lights installed.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Keebler?
I think Mr. Webb said in there earlier that they planned on doing street trees and lights along South Point Parkway. And, I would hope that that would be conditional, or that you would look for that. As far as putting the sidewalk along 27, I think that's dangerous at this point. And the reason I think it's dangerous is I think people will use it and get up to where it ends and then step up onto 27. And so frankly, I don't think that's a very good idea. If the road ever gets widened and we get an opportunity to do that as part of that project and stuff, then so be it. But I think if you put that in there now, it's dangerous. I really do.
I would have to agree with Mr. Keebler on that. I would like a sidewalk, but I also, if there's potential upgrades, we can take care of it then. I would agree with him on that. Ms. Rosenberg brought up the overlay, Mr. Perry, because this will be technically one parcel. It does fall in R2, so it is subject to that. Could you clarify, weigh in, offer perspective, please?
Thank you. Yes, we can work through that together. I think the spirit of the ordinance is to have no more than two unrelated in a rental dwelling unit. So if that's something that the applicant or the developer wants to put a restriction on themselves, then I think that's fine. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a condition, but I think if that's something they want to offer, I think that's good, a good faith effort. The council would need to waive the minimum number of lots requirement since it's 10. Obviously, it would only be one or maybe two, but I think it's possible to do.
Yes, sir.
In my review of the reports, wasn't there a discussion with the HOA that there would be some restrictions put in through the homeowners association, which may address some of those concerns? In addition, one of the things that I like to see is that, and this, we're not there yet, I just want to put this out there, that I like staff review of the HOA. I've seen situations where maybe decades later, things just fall apart, and all of a sudden there's some requests of the city to come in and do common area maintenance because the homeowners association hasn't been maintained and the documents aren't clear on what to do, and it ends up becoming an unintended problem for the municipality. I don't think that would happen here, but I've seen it, and it's just a small step to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Real quick on that, and then Ms. Blackmore, I'll get to you. I would also like some guidance from our legal counsel and our staff on so an HOA charter and bylaws can be updated and amended. So we could ask that it be a condition for approval, but I want to make sure that it's a condition of approval that lasts and is not something that can be quickly altered, to 10 years down the road, a new board unwittingly and unintentionally violates the spirit of an approval. So, Ms. Blackmer.
Yeah, I had a quick question about Veriker Farms. Is that a 65 plus development? And if so, is that the kind of thing that comes in through HOA? No, it's not. Yeah,
Mr.
Sam.
Perry.
So I think there's been a couple comments about the HOA as far as rentals and neighborhood overlay, those kind of things. One of the things we've seen done and we've seen requested, not necessarily in Oxford, is that there be a limit, and Scott Webb alluded to this, is that there be a limit on the percentage that can be rented. And what that does is that actually helps with the financing of the purchase for the ones that aren't rented. And because what we've seen happen at Northridge is, and Shauna could probably attest to this in comments we've had on HAC, is that because there's such a high percentage of rentals out there on those condos at Northridge, it causes the bank to treat those as commercial properties, and it allows the starter home buyer to not get typical financing. And so if the owner wants to volunteer to restrict themselves on the HOA to not allow more than a certain percentage, whatever that magic number is, then I think that actually has an indirect benefit to housing affordability. So it's not the age issue, but it still kind of meets a goal that I think the community is working towards, and you'll probably see some of those things come out over the next few months as well.
All right. So, Ms. Rosenberg.
It is hard. I've led meetings too. It's like, oh, I'm thinking about what's going on, but I'm also leading the meeting. So I just wanted to clarify, if we made as a condition that the HOA agreement be looked at by city staff, would it also be a benefit to ask that there be the conservation overlay, or is that just not something that would be desired or necessary? And I'm also wondering if Scott could speak to whether they would be even willing to do that.
Sure. So as I kind of mentioned during the earlier part of the presentation, it's a goal of our clients here to not let this be rentals. And it's also a goal of theirs to make sure that when they're marketing it, that the buyers are assured that these aren't going to somehow turn into rentals. So building that into the HOA in terms of, as Sam pointed out, how many can be rented at any one time, helps protect everyone's property values and things like that. Also, though, to Sam's point, the overlay district is specifically about rentals. So if the HOA says, only a max of 3 can be rented at any time, to actually then say after that, that it can only be, rented by 2 people, I guess, is perhaps possible. I mean, the HOA rental restriction, like I said, is geared toward property values, protecting everybody's property values. And so, it's a situation, I mean, personally, we went through it when my wife and I got married. She had a condo and, we just wanted to rent it for a little bit, to put it on the market. We simply weren't allowed by the HOA. So that's just what happened. So the overlay district, sort of by design, like I said, is specifically about how you can rent it. Our intention is to say, well, you almost can't rent it at all. So that's really what we're going for.
It looks like we've lost Miss Rosenberg, but she's back.
Had to reboot.
So
I apologize. And if I had a Windows machine, I wouldn't be back yet. So
and I think that's where my longevity concern comes from, because having not been part of an HOA, I don't know what is in perpetuity and what can be updated so often. So I think that's probably where Miss Rosenberg and I are curious about the overlay, because that's a little more permanent.
Can I jump in there?
Definitely.
An HOA is intended to have permanence, and the amendment process has often. I don't want to lock anything in, because it's not my place to do that, and I'm not writing them. But there are typically supermajority requirements before anything's changed. The idea is that when homeowners come in, they know exactly what the expectations are, and that one follows the homeowner rules. The problems occur not in the first decade most often. It's when a development becomes very mature and things change. And there has to be mechanisms to reflect that change whenever they might occur. I suspect on this development, I will not be the law director for many, many moons when those issues become ripe, if they do. And so we want to just be mindful that we don't want to create problems for the future generations. And so you want some flexibility, but you don't want to make it too easy.
No, and I appreciate that. I guess in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of the Airbnb concept didn't exist a decade ago. So, what will we? I mean, I know I look 14, but the internet really didn't exist when I was in college. So things change rapidly nowadays, and I'm just want to make sure we're ahead of the curve. All right. So before we move forward, I just want to make sure that folks know we make our decisions based on the decision criteria. And there are, gosh, what is there, 14 of them? 12 or 14 off the top of my head. And we'll go with 14. So, Sam, do you have the ability to put that up and scroll us through those? I am okay if you put up the ones that you have commentary, or the ones that are just listed alone. I think the ones in your report probably would be better.
I'm going to try to let Zach do that here.
Okay.
Back over. think he's got quicker access to it.
I just want to, my intent is to look at these and then entertain motions that the commission feel are appropriate.
You could also go through them verbally and, do a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever makes it the most efficient.
Okay, that'll work. Zach, if you want to work on putting them up, that's great. So the first decision criteria, the proposed plan development is in fact permitted in the zoning district in which it is proposed. And just nod if you agree. All right, great. Number two, if the application is for the same site where a plan development application has been denied within 1 year, the plan is substantially different from the application so denied. To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been anything. Number three, the use and site plan will satisfy the general intent of the zoning code. All right. If everyone thumbs up, thumbs down, because when he shared the screen, you all became very small. Okay, perfect. And if I miss anyone, feel free to unmute and speak up if you do not agree. Number four, the use and site plan will be compatible with the general intent of the comprehensive plan. All right. The size and shape of the site are sufficient for the proposed plan development. All right.
Yes.
Number six, the use will not be hazardous or disturbing to existing or potential future neighboring uses that are permitted in the zoning district.
Will not be.
All right. Again, if I happen to miss you, feel free to vocalize. Number seven, the use will not involve activities, processes, materials, equipment, or conditions of operation that will be detrimental to any person, property, or the general welfare because of excessive production of traffic noise, smoke, fumes, glare, odors, or other emissions. All right, thank you. Number eight, accessory uses will be directly related to the operation of the principal uses and will not be operated independent of principal uses. All right. Number nine, the use and site will adequately be served by public facilities and services such as streets, water, sewer, drainage structures, police and fire protection, and refuse disposal, or adequate provisions will be made to provide for the same services privately. All right, thank you. Number 10, development of the site and operation of the use will not require substantial public expenditure for additional infrastructure or services. Thank you, Mr. Keebler. Number 11, the site will be designed, constructed, and maintained in a character harmonious in appearance and general character with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity, and that such use will not change the essential character of the same area. Structures to be constructed, reconstructed, or altered in a residential zoning district shall have the appearance of residential buildings permitted in the zoning district. All right. Number 12, the site is designed so that on-site traffic and traffic accessing the site will not adversely impact the movement or safety of all modes of traffic on adjacent public streets. I know there was some discussion about that. I believe Mr. Keebler was satisfied. Everyone else seems to agree. Number 13, proposed construction will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of natural, scenic, or historical feature of major importance. All right, and the last one, proposed construction will not result in the complete elimination of existing mature tree canopy. Effort shall be made to direct disturbance and construction around or away from existing mature tree canopy without completely taking away the use of the site or connectivity to existing infrastructure. All right, there was discussion, thank you, Zach. There was discussion of incorporating the staff recommendations. So at this point, I think it would probably, unless there's further comments, questions, I think it'd be appropriate to entertain a motion, and that would, in my estimation, include any, all, or additional conditions as mentioned. Mr. Keebler?
I would move for approval of what is the name of this? Move for approval of PC 2020-16 preliminary plan development, 1986 Lake Forest Drive, with the inclusion of staff recommendations 1 through 10 on page 14 and 15 of the staff report.
All right. Do I have a second?
Can I second and add the condition that the HOA agreement needs to be reviewed by staff?
So you can second it, and then in discussion, I think you could ask
Oh, I
Mr.
can
Keebler to amend it.
change my
Perfect.
motion to include review, to include number 11, a review by city staff, including our law director.
Second.
Included and provided by final approval.
All right. So we have a motion to approve the preliminary proposal as presented with the staff recommendations and an additional HOA review and approval caveat. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there anything that was brought up that was not captured in the motion that the commission feels should be related to discussion? I believe, and the only reason I bring that up is I want to make sure that the intent number 5 covers what Ms. Reed presented with the sidewalk connecting with the annex and Mr. Keebler's observation of US 27 sidewalk construction.
I think you just want to strike the words "and US 27" and that'd probably cover it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Keebler, agree? Mr.
Yes.
Moore?
Yeah, I just would like to bring up condition number 7 had to do with the geotechnical investigations that were recommended by Butler Soil and Water. And I would just be curious whether the applicant was agreeable to that condition as worded, or whether they would suggest it be modified somehow. I was just curious about that and thought I might mention it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Reed or Mr. Webb?
Yes, we're fine with how that's written. We've already spoke to SNME about that. It'll help, it'll assist us with the design anyway. It's good practice.
All right. So the motion on the table is to approve as presented with 10 staff recommendations, the 11th HOA condition, number 5, striking the US 27 sidewalk portion. I'm seeing nods. I believe I've captured that for our friend who will make our minutes. Any discussion, any further discussion, I should say, from the commission? All right, so motion on the table, no further discussion. Mr. Perry, will you call the roll?
Yes, sir, will do. I'll start with Mr. Dana.
Mr. Dana, you're muted.
You're muted, Steve.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Keebler,
Yes.
Ms. Blackmore,
Yes.
and Mr. Watt.
Yes, and to reiterate the record for our colleague, Mr. Snavely had recused himself at the beginning. But he will come back now because we are done with this matter. All right.
Happy to stick it out.
All right. Thank you, folks. The next agenda item. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Thank you, Ms. Reed. The next agenda item that we have is a brief, I believe it's brief, the alley lot setbacks. Mr. Perry, Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will pull up a few slides for the commission. Just bear with me here. Okay. So this is a discussion item that we felt needed to be brought to the commission's attention. I am unmuted, correct? Okay, just want to make sure. And this has to do with the alley lots that are found throughout the mile square in terms of measuring the setbacks on those lots. So just to give everybody some background, so the the four most common residential districts in the mile square areas of town are the R1, R2, and R3 MS, and the residential office or RO zones. And these are the setbacks that are currently prescribed by our code in the various district sections in our district chapter for front yard, side yard, and rear yard. And for the most part, a lot of them are identical to one another. So it's most commonly a 20-foot setback in the front yard, 7.5 feet for the side yard, and 35 feet is always the standard for a rear yard. The only differences to note would be that R2MS has a 7-foot minimum side yard, and then in the R3MS, there's a 15-foot minimum setback and the 25-foot maximum setback with a 5-foot side yard. And we have some guidance provided in our code in our supplemental section, which is in Chapter 1141, that provides this exhibit as well as a number of written statements about where various yards are to be measured. And yards and setbacks are related concepts, but they're not quite one and the same. So the setback is the way of effectively measuring the minimum yard, but then once a structure is built, the placement of the structure would define how you determine the individual yards, front, side, and rear. But this is some guidance that our code provides, and what staff has done is I put together this exhibit shortly after I started, just to kind of make sense of how the individual yards are measured for different lot types that we see that are common in the mile square. And of course, the subject of this discussion item, which I'll try to make as brief as possible, but certainly eager to get input on, would be the type of lots that I've identified here in red, which are those that only have frontage on alleyways and no frontage on a public street. So this diagram, if you will, is kind of demonstrating a typical block layout in our mile square with crisscrossing of alleyways and then streets on each of the 4 sides. So you can see that, at least in the diagram that was prepared, the only type of alley lot that was really considered and has become, at least at this time, accepted practice of measuring setbacks would be the corner lot on alleys, the type of lot that borders one alley on one side and another alley on another. So really what we want to get feedback on are the lots that aren't on corners. But just to give you guys some examples of projects that have taken place on alley lots. So example 1 here, this is on West Collins. This is one that was actually built. It's near the fire station. And this was built in 2018. So here's the location of the structure and the parking. And you can see it's clearly on a corner alley lot. And I believe the setback measurements for this one, and I believe the front yard was 20 feet. I'm not sure what the side yard was, anywhere from 7.5 to 5 feet it would have been. But you can see how the structure had been built. And I believe there was a variance for the parking as well to allow 2 parking spaces in the front yard when normally the code only allows for 1. There's a few other examples that have either gone through the review process or been through some sort of review prior to this discussion tonight. So another example is over on East Collins. We received a building permit to build a residential unit on this particular site. So again, that's a corner lot there, and this was the site plan that was submitted. So showing the meeting the side yard setback effectively from both of the sides, and then meeting the front yard setbacks. So that one was going to be, that's going to be a by right build. It didn't require any variances or anything of that nature. There was a recent variance over on East Withrow, so example 3, and they needed a variance to allow for the 2 required parking spaces in the front yard, and then also they needed some coverage variances for this particular site. But again, this is the one on the corner. So at this time, we're measuring the front yard setbacks for these corner lots pretty much as if, kind of pretending as if they are fronting on public streets. So taking the exact same setback measurements, front and side, 2 sides, 2 fronts, the same as we would a lot that fronts upon 2 public streets on a corner. But it's become a little bit more confusing for staff when we talk about, here's another example. It hasn't seen any applications at this time, but it's one that we're aware of over off of West High. It has frontage along an alley, but Its configuration is more standard because it's not on a corner. There isn't a crisscrossing alley on this particular block. So if this were, a normal street frontage here, it would be pretty clear that you take the front from the street, you take sides from either of the side lot lines, and then you take a rear yard setback of 35 feet from the rear. With this particular example, the depth of the lot is shallow enough that the buildable area would be a pretty narrowly confined area once you take the 20 feet and the 35 feet from the front of the lot and the back of the lot. And our code really doesn't make a distinction at this point about how to measure setbacks differently for these type of alley lots versus lots that have standard frontage on a public street. So at this point, the practice, at least at this point, is, we kind of have a sense for what the practice should be for the corner lots, but when we get into territory such as this, it's starting to make us question whether these setbacks are being applied properly, and whether we need to, think about alley lots differently in terms of what sort of setback regulations they should be subject to. So we just wanted to let the commission know that we're facing those questions at the moment. There's certainly a lot of investors out there that are eager to develop available land, and if they have lots that are available that they can build upon, then they are asking me and Sam, how should the setback measurements be applied? And so we are running into those interpretation type questions fairly recently here within the last few months or so, I guess. And just wanted to let the commission know and give you a chance to respond to that. I guess I'll turn it over to Sam. This is the last slide in my collection of discussion slides here, but Sam, is there anything else that you would like to comment on or piggyback on from what I've just shown the commission?
Oh, thanks, Zach. I know it's getting late, but a lot of the work that goes on with this kind of stuff you never see because it handles at the staff level or with Board of Zoning Appeals. So, for example, the last slide there, that would probably be a Board of Zoning Appeals case, and if that's okay, and makes it basically undevelopable without a BZA approval, that's just how it is. If it's something that you think, we should spend some time on looking at, we'll do that. We haven't done a citywide analysis of where these are and how many there are, but we just kind of want to give you an idea on what's happening with some of these alley lots that are left over. So let us know, and we'll take it from there.
Mr. Keebler.
When that judge made the decision to say if it's a buildable lot and it's within the area, the city used to have an ordinance that said you couldn't put a dwelling unit if it didn't front on a public street. It was taken to court and the judge ruled against the city, took the control totally away from the city. These were lots, folks, that were ancillary buildings. They were barns, they were garages, they were shops, as that number one slide showed, where there was a little storage that was used from the old farm store. And all of a sudden, people thought, well, I can buy these and I'm going to start building residences. The fire department hates it, I'll tell you that. You can't get fire trucks down the alley. They're dangerous. Some of the things that happened uptown in the alley behind the old Snyder's building, those 3 apartments that got put in there, it's a travesty. And so don't make it any easier. Don't make it any easier. Make them go to zoning board of appeals and let them turn it down like they did the last one. And hopefully we'll get more turned down, because if you make it easier, you're going to see people trying to do lot splits, more of these. They'll be hunting around, going through the studies, trying to find more lots to build more houses on, where it's a dangerous proposition, folks. So let them go to Board of Zoning Appeals every time.
Mr. Snavely.
That's just my opinion.
Well, I agree with your opinion. Am I unmuted? Yes, I am.
You're good.
So I agree with Richard on that. And My problem is with Board of Zoning Appeals, because depending on what board you get, they might accept everything or they might accept nothing. So I think it's worth staff looking at it with the comment that Dick just made, that maybe some lots shouldn't be built on and we shouldn't be going to Board of Zoning Appeals. And so I'd like to make it more difficult for BZA to approve something rather than to send everything to BZA, because everybody knows I really do not trust BZA at the present time.
All right. Ms. Blackmer?
It sounds like it would be good to get some input from fire safety on this particular process. I mean, from a strict policy perspective, I don't object to the idea of having more housing in a mile square where many of these lots are located. I think that that's something that would be a benefit in many cases. We have a lot of kind of missing teeth in the mile square, it feels. And so I would be quite intrigued to know what the safety perspective was on this, and certainly that should take precedence. But I don't have the same kind of antipathy towards this that others have expressed.
How about this? I think, it's getting late, but I think we can do a 2-page memo just to give you an overview of what we learned from police and fire over the past several years. It may not be a comprehensive data analysis, but it gives you a little bit of a kind of a multifaceted perspective on what's going on. And then if you decide we do nothing, that's fine. You'll at least have a little bit more information. Okay.
Perfect. The only thing I would add to that is if you could also look at, in addition to fire and safety, if you could look at accessibility from a pedestrian drivability standpoint, because I know that is very, in the greater scheme of planning for the city, those kind of issues, mobility, accessibility. So
we'll do.
All right. If there are no other questions, comments, or concerns, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I entertain.
So move.
All right. That was a tie between Mr. Dana and Mr. Snavely. I've never seen two people jump at their cameras so quickly. All those in favor of calling it a night, raise your hand. Unanimous consent. Have a good night.
Good night.